History of the Peloponnesian Peninsula during the Middle Ages by Jacob Philipp Fallmerayer, Royal Professor and Ordinary Member of the Academy of Sciences in Munich. Second volume. Morea, devastated by internal wars between the Franks and the Greeks, and overrun by Albanian settlers, is finally conquered by the Turks. From 1250 to 1500 A.D., Stuttgart and Tübingen, published by the Third G. Kottasche Bookstore, 1836. I do not know how it happens that most learned men prefer to hold on to and vigorously defend an opinion they have embraced, rather than calmly inquire what is most certainly true. Cicero. Preface. Today, Europeans generally agree on two things. First, that the Greek uprising wasn't mainly caused by conflicts between the Turkish rulers and the Greek Christians' education or social conditions. Like in 1770, it was mostly sparked by outside forces. So, the revolt wasn't just the work of the Greek people, it was partly driven by foreigners too. Second, without strong intervention by outside powers, any attempt to change the Greek border government would have failed again. The local Christian population, pushed into a task far beyond their strength, would have suffered the same fate as defeated rebels. A third point is still avoided, but soon it will have to be said. Greece, as it is now, still has enough people and resources to form an independent kingdom. Greece is only a fragment. You see ruins left behind from the Turkish Empire that humans try in vain to rebuild. Even a genius like Pygmalion couldn't bring life to these broken pieces. Only the force that created Greece can keep it alive, but force wears out over time. A country lasts longer if it generates life from within. Greece, however, does not live by itself, because it possesses neither sufficient power for self-defense nor for self-governance. Foreign gold still annually buys the ambiguous obedience of its great men, and its continuation has no other guarantee than the whims of its protectors. It is a bitter and, for the pride of European peoples, not insignificant humiliation that the enthusiasm of half a world had to be consumed in the creation of a creature breathing so slowly. The catastrophe came before its natural ripeness, and therefore cannot yield the hoped-for fruits. For this reason, the Greeks have already begun to tire Europe, and many once ardent supporters of their cause are today lukewarm or indifferent, if not openly hostile, because only a single one of their dithyrambic expectations has been fulfilled, and, if one speaks the truth, could have been fulfilled. How? One often hears complaints that the Hellenes, this people of prophets, heroes, and sages, were supported with devotion in money and blood, and partly against the warnings of old statecraft toward independent existence, and they were presented as the kernel, around which, without doubt, all Greek-speaking and believing peoples of the Ottoman Empire would eventually unite, to expand the borders of the newly formed state through the pressure of natural force, to become politically significant and intellectually mature, and finally, as a counterbalance to northern power, to occupy the empty space of the Ottoman Empire. But behold, the flashes of Hellenic intellectual superiority still refuse to emerge from darkness, and the uninitiated far away leave the blessed fields of the Ister and Meander, the green-hilled shores of the Hellespont, the Tempe Valley, and the gardens of the Bosporus, to go to Hellas. Yet even they depart from the classical soil, from the land of freedom, to lodge again in the shadow of the Turkish throne, and pay tax anew to the old masters of Hellas. This is the complaint of our time, and in many ways the party spirit exploits it to accuse honest and insightful men, entrusted with the leadership of the young state, and even to see in the unexpected resistance of the land a satire on one of the most earnest and manly peoples of Germany. As if this people were too phlegmatic, too slow-minded, and equally incapable of understanding its mission and enthroning the new Hellenism in Morea. The source of all errors, misfortunes, and delusions, however, lies far less in the people than in the origin of the uprising and the principle from which the intervention of European powers in the Greek cause sprang. Public opinion in Europe, insofar as it is shaped, guided, and expressed by scholars, decided, at the outbreak of the unrest, at a glance that the revolution in Greece was not a result of an internally necessary, and thus lasting, creative fermentation, but rather one could at least still recognize the Hellenes from the times of Pausanias and Pliny, though descended from the old majesty. Nevertheless, it was veram et meram Gregiam, an unmingled people emerging almost like from a caste, bounded all around and elevated in its type above others. A nation by heritage, a people to whom the master of nature had granted their sense of beauty and admiration as an exclusive inheritance. This artistic sense, it was thought, was entirely fused with the essence of the Hellenic race and could only perish together with the people. This nation, however, with its creative spirit and ancient elasticity, had so far only been suppressed by a foreign power, and its original character, after the removal of Ottoman tyranny, would suddenly re-emerge with splendor and circulate as a people-blessing currency in the civilized world. This view of the unweakened Hellenism was so strongly established at the center of Europe that the learned editor of the Leucothea even explained certain notes cited by Chandler, Easterland, and Leek about the existence of non-Hellenic people on Hydra and other parts of Greece as entirely the product of hearsay, dreams, and self-deception. The naivety of those days went so far that sailors and captains of Hydra had to be considered Hellenes solely because of their rare courage and skill at sea, for an Albanian could not possibly possess such qualities. The leaders then saw and proclaimed nothing but miracles, and as if ordinary human wisdom were insufficient to govern Hellas, rising from the grave, they awaited, with anxious curiosity, generals and statesmen of higher caliber, who, without doubt, would arise from the fermentation of this extraordinary people, and renew before astonished Europe the wonders of ancient times. But the revolution, with all its violence and bloodshed, did not produce such leaders. The Greek people appeared spiritually dead, a mixed, rough, and fragmented mass, with no spark of classical life shining through yet. This Greek chaos lives only because European monarchs intervened, and it belongs entirely to Europe, which rescued it and pulled it in like a battered ship. The glory of Pericles, the art of Praxiteles, and Platonism, the ideals once supported by devoted friendships in morals and culture, are now fading before our eyes. The internal divisions of the people, the two major factions, the Slavs and Arnauts, and the near disappearance of the old Hellenic national identity are becoming clearer every day. It is widely recognized now that artistic sense and appreciation of beauty, the hallmarks of ancient Greek culture, are completely missing in modern Greeks. Nature denied them this gift, just as it did the Turks. But if they lack the old cultural marks, what remains at the core of their life, the true national identity that allowed them to resist centuries of Ottoman oppression and survive as a separate people. This achievement belongs entirely to the Greek Church. Not bloodlines, not ancient memory, not art, not temples sustained them, but shared worship and faith. The 7 ecumenical councils, the consecration of ruling dynasties, the god-emperor and the patriarch in Istanbul, along with their monks and church discipline, provided the structure that preserved them and continues to do so today. To be clear, it was not cultured, art-loving Greeks, but Roman Christians, followers of the Anatolian Church, who endured the storms and now stand ready at the edge of Europe to defend their own lives. This strength is entirely tied to their faith, which has merged so deeply with their hearts and blood that the oppression of the Turks was not the main threat. It was the ignorance imposed by Mohammedan rule. Had the sultans adopted the faith of the Komneni and Palaiologoi, Greece's current situation might never have existed. The Turks would, in our eyes, have become Hellenes, as the Bulgarians and Albanians had before them. The gulf between this mostly Hellenic Ottoman Empire and the mostly Latin Christian West would have been just as unbridgeable as the divide between Rome and Mecca. That's why the Greek leaders, especially on the islands, seeing that they would not be governed nationally, that is, under Anatolian church law, often regret turning away from Ottoman rule. At a distance from Istanbul, they almost see a national disaster. They feel more wounded today by the presence of foreign Franks than they once did by the muezzin's call to prayer in the minaret of Tripolitza, or by the rod of Ottoman discipline over their heads. As true life exists in their indelible aversion and disdain toward the Westerners, their dogmas, their character, and their habits. Between these people and Europeans, nature itself has placed an eternal dividing wall, and one must, as it were, destroy oneself and live as a Greek in faith and custom, in hatred and love, in order to coexist with this people. In our tolerant, dogmatically weary Europe, the meaning of such a statement will not be easily grasped everywhere, and one must leave judgment to time alone, which always restores everything to its proper measure, and has always been the only teacher of the unwise. We do not blame the Greek people for being as they are. On the contrary, we wish to draw attention to the previously underestimated power of religious devotion and show that a people, even if politically divided, barbarically ignorant, and morally flawed, must not be despised, so long as it possesses, inspired by a dogmatic idea, an ideal center and hearth of life. This hearth of life of the Greek people is materialized in the two cities, Istanbul and Moscow. There the Greek breathes and thinks. There is his altar and praetorium. All Anatolian believers, from Morea, the Nile, the Jordan, the Orontes, the Palmyrene Desert, Cyprus, and Caramania, turn toward it. All Roman pulses converge there and radiate outward. All these lands, separated by mountains and seas but morally compact, were destined for the great work of the uprising. Yet natural world order, which proceeds consistently and with wise economy, allowed only a fragment of this giant body to reach the desired goal. This fragment, isolated and uneasy, resists new sympathies and evidently leans back toward the two, toward the life it was meant to abandon. Wise men foresaw this in time and tried to address the problem by severing the spiritual connection between the new realm and the old patriarchal throne in Constantinople. The measure was, in principle, perfectly correct and timely. But can sympathies of the heart and necessity be torn apart without recognition by decree? Instead of Constantine's labyrinth and the apocalypse, this people was soon given a pale phantom called Hellenism, or freedom, dressed in the garb of European bureaucracy, with its countless, all-consuming Byzantine-style municipal edicts set up as a banner around which the politically and morally orphaned elements might gather and form a united body. The result of these two alternately attempted remedies shows itself every day. The revolution has only paused. It still exists in all hearts, and it can and will achieve its natural aim only by establishing a materially broader and more popular foundation. Who will say how, when, or through whom this will be realized? What is known, however, is that from one end of Greece to the other, the saying prevails. Through patience and perseverance, we have resisted the intrusions of Mohammedanism, and we will, at last, also resist the Franks and their measures. Was it not a grave error to plant and nourish this thought in the hearts of the Greek people, rather than satisfy and suppress it by timely Byzantine-style measures? As soon as this new Greek kingdom was freed from the Turkish state alliance, Europe was already thinking about its budget, troops, uniforms, and tax lists, and calculating which government experiments and happiness theories they could try there, and what material and intellectual benefits they could gain from this new El Dorado. Europe imagined Greece as just another European country, with the same needs and resources, the same virtues and vices, and especially the same patience and flexibility to accept any political system, perfect for testing modern statecraft. They also imagined Greeks of all ages to be full of ambition, desire for learning, and true love for their homeland, so that, transplanted from the corruption and barbarism of the Orient into Western civilization, they would bring the dream of Hellenic republics, liberal constitutions, assemblies, and all the glitter of a new world order into their country, as if they had already passed through all stages of social development, like the people of Britain or France, ready to enjoy full civic rights. But the ordinary people did not understand these foreign ideas, and they rejected them. They were like soap bubbles drifting across the water without leaving a trace. Compare this to the Batavian or North American revolutions, which quickly gained wealth, glory, and power. In contrast, Greece, after a long period of peace, remained poor and weak. Its population was shrinking, its resources were not growing, even though Europe had poured gold into it. This shows that no one there was ready to handle freedom, and the Greeks were politically no more advanced than the Muscovites of Kiev, the Wallachians of Jassy, or Europe in the 12th century, when Crusader banners flew and Jerusalem was the ultimate goal. The instinct of such peoples is monarchy without variation. Only strict, fair, and fully national rule can prepare this suddenly freed Greece to join the European state system and govern itself properly. If Europeans thought it unnecessary to guide Greek politics, they still could not ignore the need to secure what they had already gained. Rule like the Turco-Russians, but dress and believe like the Greeks. This is the basic guide for anyone who wants power in Greece. The world is arranged so that from Archangel to Cape Matapan, one faith, one law, one practice, and one driving force should prevail. What resists this order destroys itself or sinks. No good deed, however sincere, will ever make the Greeks reconcile with other faiths, and everything Europeans have done or will do, the Greeks see as the only true legacy, and themselves as legitimate heirs of the Hellenes, tribute owed by the simple, foolish West. According to them, Hellas is like a European house for the disabled, a kind of world prytaneum, whose Greek residents, and through them all, peoples who live under their influence, are obliged to provide nourishment and praise, giving them an honorable, but idle and carefree life. One can be a sincere friend of the Greek cause without believing that the Greeks fought more brilliantly in their last battles than any people on earth. And even if one grants justice to the heroism of the Albanians of Suli and Hydra, what they did had already happened many times before among other peoples. Courage and desperate resistance in times of need are a common human trait, not a special privilege of Albanians or Rumelians, as some now claim. The peoples allied with the Greeks, Montenegro and Serbia, performed far more brilliant feats against the Turks on land than all the Vlach and Klept captains of the Greek War of Liberation combined. Nothing in the entire Greek struggle compares to Ali Pasha's defeat in Montenegro, 22nd September, 1795, or the glorious days of Barbasrin and Nisa in Serbia, 1810. Greeks in Warsaw, Krakow, and Gijova look at your blood relatives in Fagodina, Kragujevac, and along the Morava. Is their land less fertile, their population smaller, less educated, or less capable than yours? The Serbs relied entirely on themselves and never forgot that when a people wants to rise to a better condition, in the final instance nothing is left but their own arm and skill. You, Greeks, have only the distinction that your barbaric huts were built on the ruins of Hellenic cities. If Serbian lands were also ancient Hellenic soil, it is uncertain whether one would grant you, or Milosh's subjects, the prize of political competence. But if Europe turns its protective gaze away and allows the Turks to send ships and regiments to reconquer lost lands, will you, praised heroes, relying only on yourselves and abandoned by Europe, be able to preserve your homeland's independence for long? Everyone knows that the burning national hatred which allows small forces to resist the greatest power has now died out among you, or has shifted away from the Turks toward the west, the very force that saved you. This shift in public opinion is an unfortunate sign, not only for the Greeks themselves, but also for their admirers in the West, whose excessive praise has spoiled them and contributed significantly to their lack of discipline. How could anyone expect a wild, unruly people to be willingly governed by foreigners, who, according to their flatterers, are infinitely superior in noble birth, genius, intellect, and fame? We already know we are Hellenes, one often hears among the lower classes in Greece. And when asked what a Hellene really is, they answer, the Hellenes were a people who never kept a king longer than 3 to 5 years, and would always either kill or exile him. The source of these harmful prejudices clearly lies in the view the West has held of Greece's fate over the past 1,500 years. To spread some knowledge about this period and gradually guide public opinion onto the right path, the first volume of A History of the Peloponnese during the Middle Ages was published years ago, arguing that between the 6th and 12th centuries, 590 to 1200, a material revolution occurred in the population of this island. As a result, the old race, with its cities and arts, its entire culture and ancient ideas, largely disappeared. The preface at the time already hinted at a second event of this kind, encompassing the entire mainland of what is now the kingdom, the full details of which were promised in the present volume. Before publishing it, the author spent 3 years traveling not only along the Greek coasts on both sides of the Aegean Sea, but also through much of the mainland to reinforce and substantiate his views with additional first-hand experience, which not everyone would immediately accept. Fragments of old chronicles preserved in ruined Athens, alongside a careful examination of the current state of the lands and their inhabitants, inside and outside the Peloponnese, confirm not only what the first volume stated, based on Byzantine sources, about the upheaval of the Peloponnese and its neighbors by foreign peoples, but also extend the boundaries of destruction even further, involving towns and rural areas previously thought to have been spared. The collected materials, intended to correct and support the first volume against critical attacks, were formally presented as an academic treatise. Yet, the more these positive testimonies, documents, personal observations, and daily events in Greece contradict the opposing doctrine, the more eagerly they seek to establish themselves in public opinion, to maintain belief in the uninterrupted continuation of a classical Hellenic world. Dion knows it, and they, us, require an investigation that dissects and holds accountable the feelings of nations toward the Greek cause. It must be considered, however, that future generations will not judge our actions with the same passionate intensity. They will measure the century's events by a different standard and with calm reason. We, driven by controlled emotions, preceded every consideration and insight with action. Therefore, the favor of our era cannot fully appreciate such a volume, or can only do so to a very limited degree. The love of strict scholarship is hardly strong enough, even in Germany, to allow the idea of the day and the self-interest of so many, painfully challenged by this writing, to be fully vindicated. Because these matters must be decided not by speculation, but empirically, and generally for historiography, and specifically for the final constitution of Greece, they carry a significance that opponents have carefully considered, preparing in advance responses to any objections arising from revealing Greek conditions, past or present. If their assertions are proven mistaken, both theoretically and in application to contemporary Greece, their defenders will have difficulty avoiding charges of frivolity, ignorance, and impracticality. that the famous people of ancient Athens, the Hellenic-speaking sons of classical times, cannot be found in their fortresses or capital today, was thoroughly demonstrated in the previously mentioned treatise. But this absence is not due to weakening or mingling with foreign elements, as is sometimes conveniently claimed. Rather, the population of Attica was uprooted entirely, swept away and destroyed over centuries like their old gods. Albanians or Shqiptars, whose mother tongue is not Greek but the barbaric Shqip, have taken over these abandoned places. Even in Athens, where since the revolution a population has formed from all regions of Turkey and the West, the core is so Albanian that a special tribunal is necessary to adjudicate in Shqiptar law. These Albanian Athenians often understand Romaic and use it with foreigners, but among themselves, especially in rural areas, they speak only Shqip. One may call the Shqiptars of Marathon, Eleusis, and the Academy of Plato Hellenes, since they hold the heart of ancient Hellas. But the witty contemporaries of an Aristophanes would find little else to recognize among them. Granted, one cannot deny that ancient Attica today is essentially an Shqiptar, Albanian fringe. The situation may be somewhat better in neighboring Attic regions, such as Boeotia. If one travels from Eleusis across the barren stony grounds and the melancholy ash and hazel forests to reach the heights of Cithaeron, wide views open over the plains of ancient Boeotia. To the left, at the foot of the hills near the village of Kokkola, lie the old ruins of Plataea. Further on, the rubble where once stood Leuctra and Thespiae at the foot of Helicon. On the route from Thebes to Livadeia, one encounters Onchestos, Haliartus, and Coronea. Further toward the Phocian border, Plutarch's native city, Chaeronea. Hellenic peoples still inhabit these cities, nymphs the Dirk spring, and the muses Helicon. What a vain hope, not half ruined like the monuments of Suez or Karnak in Egypt, or Homs and Baalbek in Syria, but swept entirely from the ground along with their inhabitants. So are all Hellenic cities of Boeotia without exception, leaving space here and there only for a small Sarmatian village such as Dobrena, Granitsa, Distra, Topolia, or Caprina. Even Helicon itself has borne the Bulgarian name Sagora for over 1,000 years. But if one listens to the people of Dobrena, Distra, Kokala, or Granitsa, their speech is no longer even Sarmatian, like the village names, but also Shqiptar, as in Attica. Turning south from Boeotia through Megara toward the Isthmus of Corinth, one hardly knows whether one is in ancient Greece or in the middle of Albania. The Shqiptars have settled so completely in these regions that they have not even learned modern Greek sufficiently to make themselves understood to outsiders, as we ourselves discovered in Paracora and Kuluchik. Thus, if one calls all the land from Cape Sunium to the ridge of Helicon, and from the isthmus at Corinth up to Oropos, and the modern district of Zalanti, New Albania, one is describing the situation accurately. These provinces of the Greek kingdom have no closer relationship to Hellenism than the highlands of Scotland have to Kandahar and Kabul. A steadfast defender of the old Hellenes will nevertheless not declare defeat. With Gemistus Pletho, he will place his last hope on the original seat of the Greek race, the Doric Peloponnesus and its nearby islands, and will recognize the old Hellenic tribes of this island among the Moreates of our time. He will speak of Achaeans, Zaconians, Laconians, Messenians, and Argives, and linger with special affection among the Arcadians and their shepherds, while rightly taking pride in the sea heroes of Hydra. Yet, immediately on the threshold of the Peloponnesus, one again encounters the energetic and strong peasant population of the Shqiptars. They are found in majority in the two provincial towns, Corinth and Argos, in the regions where once stood Epidaurus, Troezen, Hermione, and Mycenae. That is, throughout ancient Argolis, Shkiptars are the sole inhabitants. Nauplia, before the uprising inhabited only by Osmanlis, now hosts a population of Albanians, modern Greeks, and foreigners of various origins, each with its distinct character. If one travels from Corinth into the mountains where Phlius once stood, through the Arcadian highlands and past villages like Krakow and Warsaw to Kamenz in Achaia, then south across the land to Glogau, Zulichau, and Alt-Wolgast down to the coastal town of Arcadia above Ravarin, one can still see, twice daily, villages speaking Shkiptar, even though the Peloponnesian Albanians, since the times of Frankish, have in many areas already replaced their native Shkiptar language with the language of the Sarmatian Greeks. The districts of the old regions of Arcadia and Elis, between the left bank of the Alpheus, the sea, and the borders of Messenian Krywich, especially the shepherd quarters around the ruins of the Apollo temple at Skleros and the coastal town of Arcadia, remain purely Shkiptar territory. Even from the nearby Moscow-influenced Taygetus, the Muslim Albanians have been expelled. Only the narrow, formerly Sarmatian coastal strip of Tsakonia is entirely free of these outsiders. The islands belonging to Morea, Spetsa, Hydra, and Poros remain. Here flows the purest Albanian blood, untouched and unmixed. These islands are the main base of the Shkiptars, the center of all their power, intelligence, and wealth among the Hellenized newcomers. The life and death of the last uprising depended on Hydra. It was the soul and driving force of the great drama. Thus, the revolution was a Shkiptar one, not Hellenic, because all the truly remarkable and effective deeds of the struggle were carried out by warriors of Shkiptar descent. Today, everyone knows that the heroic catastrophe at Missolonghi and the steadfastness of the Hydra sailors were the two beacons of the uprising and the lifelines of the Greek people. These achievements shook Europe and finally moved the kings to mercy, but they belong exclusively to the Shkiptar Albanians of Suli and Hydra. What did the allegedly Hellenic race, for example, the people of Tsakonia, accomplish? "We ran like sheep," said a native from the Tsakonian frontier, describing the heroic deeds of his people. We do not wish to deny anyone their deserved credit. Indeed, much praise is due to non-Albanians, especially the Greek-speaking citizens of Arakova on Parnassus and Rumelia in general. In the face of the enemy, reloading the musket twice was something that, among all the Greeks, only the Albanians from Soli and Hydra could manage. So we do not fear that even in Greece much contradiction will be raised against this. If someone took the time to review, family by family, all the people of the Peloponnese, Morea, and Rumelia, from Thermopylae down to Cape Matapan, and also the nearby islands of Spetsa, Hydra, Poros, Galaxidi, and partly Euboea, Andros, and Aegina, they would find that even today more than half are not from the so-called Sarmatian Greek people, and even less from the Hellenic, but instead belong to the brave Albanian, Shkiptar race, who still speak their own language. If from the rest you subtract the Hellenized Albanians of the Morea, the nomadic Vlachs of northern Locris, the farming Vlachs spread through all provinces, the settled gypsies of Aetolia, and the organized beggar groups of Krivari, plus the descendants of Bulgarians, Krivicians, Taygetus Slavs, Carantanians, Sarmatians of all kinds, Italians, Spaniards, Provençals, Walloons, and Egyptians, all groups whose settlement in Greece is historically proven and even acknowledged by Byzantine writers of the 15th century. Then the question arises, in which family of the kingdom could anyone still claim true Old Hellenic descent? The Phanariots, though often unfairly criticized in Greece, are in fact much closer to Hellenic blood than the people of Morea and Rumelia. The Ypsilantes, Murusis, Kalamakis, and thousands of others are recorded as having come from ancient Greek colonies around Trebizond on the Black Sea to Constantinople. But whoever wants to see truly Hellenic facial features should go to Mytilene, Moshonesia, and the rarely visited shores of Assos and Atramitium, where originals can still be found of the faces stamped on old Lesbian and Dolitian silver coins. Such faces have never been found and never will be in Free Greece, because another race has taken their place. This conclusion is based on careful, direct investigation in Greece itself. What could disprove it? Only evidence from opponents who, by the same method, personal on-site inquiry, could show that in Attica, Boeotia, Megaris, Argolis, Arcadia, in two-thirds of the Morea, and in the nearby islands, the people are not Albanians, Shkaipetars, and that their mother tongue is not Albanian but Greek, as may be the case on Kithnos and Nisyros. But the opinions of even the most learned scholars who make decisions at home, relying only on feelings, old-school memories, or political motives, have no more historical value in this matter than Walter Scott's novels or Rabelais' stories of Gargantua and Pantagruel. Those who deny outright every form of medieval revolution in Greece should follow our example and also go into specifics. They should name exactly which districts of the Morea and Rumelia, in their opinion, are still inhabited by unmixed Hellenes. Only we advise them not to lean any longer on the much-discussed Fallmerayer's History of the Decline of the Hellenes, Volume 2, with regard to Tsakonia, for already in the earlier treatise certain doubts had been raised based on local geography about these Tsakonian, or so-called genuine Hellenes. And now a passage in St. Willibald's travel report to Jerusalem around the year 725 A.D. shows that the Tsakonian coast was already more than 1,000 years ago considered part of Slovenia. This forms a new and weightier charge against Dr. Zinkhysen and his followers, who, with more zeal than knowledge, have condemned our statement that the Peloponnese in the 10th century already bore the name Slovenia. In general, not a few of the geographical and historical works recently published on modern Greece belong rather to the realm of Romantic literature. Even Dr. Zinkhysen owes it only to our earlier work on the Morea that his History of Greece, in its later sections, gradually moved away from fantasy and closer to solid historical ground. For our part, we gladly accept the consolation of having pointed out his errors in smaller details as well. Those who are only looking for results will find them intentionally gathered in this preface. But whoever wishes to see the historical development itself, the step-by-step process through which the Shkiptarization, or Albanization, of the greater part of Greece came about, will find it laid out in the main outlines of this second and final volume of the History of Morea. This volume covers in detail only the period from 1250 to 1500 AD, because after that time the population of Greece underwent no new changes and has remained the same in its elements down to the present day. Short notes, however, extend the thread of events down to our own times. With this, we have completed the task set before us, across 2 volumes and an additional closely related essay. This work is not idle speculation, as some may think. It has a clear and practical purpose. Every government, if it is not to resemble a pyramid balanced on its tip, must rest on a historical foundation, on the character, customs, religion, and lived past of its people. A government that ignores these can only sustain itself by force, and even that only for a limited time, until the springs of its power wear out and break. Where, then, is the historical and national foundation on which the legislation of the Greek kingdom can be built? That is the question our work seeks to answer. From the very beginning, 2 opposing systems of governance tried to assert themselves in Greece. Both came from Europe, and both ignored the moral condition and religious circumstances of the country. According to the first, the new order was to be drawn directly from Thucydides, Polybius, or Plutarch, as though Athena and Zeus had risen from the dust of ancient times and Europe had fallen back into barbarism. But this system is monstrous. It seeks to place dead bodies on Greece's throne, to graft decay onto living life, and to turn back the world's clock by millennia. The Greeks of today are not the Greeks of 30 centuries ago. For nations there is no resurrection of the dead. The second system, pushed by bureaucrats, views Greece as nothing more than a random strip of land, or worse, a conquered province, meant to submit to the meddling of enlightened Europe. But this too could only prolong a condition of coercion, harmful both to the people and to authority itself. Greece is not secularized like Europe. On the contrary, its strongest moral pulse still beats in religious faith. What, then, is to be done? First, do not take literally the Greeks' fine words about their brotherly love for the kings and peoples of Latin Europe. Their words mean no more than when Egypt's satraps proclaimed their loyalty to Christendom. In truth, they love only our arts, insofar as these serve power and taxation, but in their hearts they hate and despise foreigners. What the Greeks truly want is money to pocket for themselves and a king to restrain their jealousy and internal strife. But they want the king alone, without courtiers, without foreign habits, without a foreign faith, without foreign sympathies, even without foreign clothes. They want him to be one of them. After centuries of foreign presence, plunder, and humiliation, they now want, at last, to be among themselves and to enjoy the sweet feeling of a homeland that belongs only to them. If you sincerely wish this unfortunate people well, do not demand their thanks for aid, and abandon the useless attempt to civilize them in our image, to make them Europeans. Their faith and customs resist such transformation as strongly as Islamic law and tradition resist westernization in the Orient. The entire structure of their life and state rests on the dogmas of the Eastern Church, and until these are broken and uprooted, the flood of modern European ideas will never cover Hellas. Who would even dare such an attempt when the combined might of the papacy, the armored knights of the West, the despotism of the Palaiologoi, and 4 centuries of Turkish rule failed to shake the Greeks in this regard? Consider this well. Before long, the Greeks will cast off the bridge that Europe built from Germany into Hellas, and instead join forces with the other Christians of the Illyrian Triangle and the Russians behind them, against Latin Europe. This advice is easier to give than to act upon, and may please the Greek masses more than their Western friends. Neither the severity of my judgment nor the sharpness of my words should prevent the thoughtful reader from recognizing in me an honest and well-meaning friend of the Greek people. I am convinced that by presenting plainly the fate, deeds, and character of the Byzantine Greeks of the Morea in their recent past, I have done more for the Greek cause than hymns or flattering lies that neither the present justifies nor the past supports. I wish only to guard myself from the misinterpretations of overzealous enthusiasts, not to insult anyone. In this matter I have now spoken my last word. Time, the growing study of Byzantine history, and above all the Greeks themselves, in their closer and longer contact with Europe, will henceforth defend my views and shed a clearer light on their truth than any argument of mine could. Finally, I gratefully acknowledge the help I received, especially for the first volume, from the famous editor of Leo Diaconus and foremost authority on Byzantine literature, Karl B. Hasse in Paris, and in later work from my learned friend Professor Friedrich Tafel in Tübingen, who kindly provided much valuable assistance. Munich, February 1836. J. P. Fallmerayer.